Today is my 60th, pardon me, my 77th birthday, which is rather amazing to me. And I thought I might celebrate the auspicious occasion by making a video about a bit of tech that has been my companion for almost all of that journey. It is not, interestingly enough, a piece of tech, whoopsie, that bounces, well, it does bounce around sometimes, with a screen. In fact, we didn't have a screen in my house until I was 6, but I had this piece of tech from the time I was 5 years old. That bit of wonderful technology has been the bicycle. As I mentioned, we didn't have a TV in our house until I was in the first grade, 6 years old or so, and there have been times since that I have not had a television and haven't missed it. In fact, there was a time that I banned televisions from my house, and when my relatives would give me televisions for birthdays and Christmas, I would take them back and the like. But I have not been without a bicycle on purpose ever since. Sometimes my bikes have been stolen, and one bike had a horrible accident that I'll tell you about in a bit. You may notice that there's not much on this bicycle in the ways of accessories. I have become a minimalist over the years, and the minimalism has extended to my bicycle. There is a lock, which I have found unfortunately to be necessary in the modern world, but that's all, no fenders. But anyway, there it is, the bicycle. If I may paraphrase Steve Jobs, it's sort of the personal computer for the body. My first bike, the one I got, I believe, for my 5th birthday, was a hardware bicycle of some sort, I'm sure. I think it may have been a J.C. Higgins from Sears. I don't remember much about it except it was red, because in those days boys' bikes were red and girls' bikes were blue, and I was the boy, and so I had a red bike, and it was the key to freedom. I could ride it to school, and after school wander by the Jut-'em-Down store where my parents had a charge account and get a snack, and in good weather. Well, those were the days when parents opened the doors to the kids and said, "Shoo, shoo." And I could go as far as my little feet could take me until time to go for a fuel stop at lunch, and then back at dinner. And then in the summertime, I could ride after supper. And the other kids in the neighborhood used, gosh, I wish we had those stunt sort of bikes in those days. We would try to ride up telephone poles and like. We never did, but we didn't kill ourselves. But that bike was, I don't know, sort of a Ford Model A, I guess. But when I was 6 or about 7, I think 6 actually, late 6, my grandmother in a lottery won the Cadillac of all bicycles. It was a Schwinn with a tank and springs and a bell, well, not a bell, a buzzer, a horn, and a headlight and a tail light and streamers and fenders made of genuine chrome. It took about 8D batteries to make it work, and I rode that bike everywhere for 10 years. When I first got it, I had this discarded hot water tank to be able to get on the thing. But by the time it had its inglorious, well, kind of a glorious end, I had come finally to outweigh it. I lost it to a pond. That bike, as I say, it was wonderful, and I tried to convert it to a submersible, and I built some sort of ballast tanks for it and rigged up a way I could paddle it, and it would float, but when I filled the ballast tanks with water, it would submerge, but I could not empty the ballast tank through the wonderful snorkel I had made to take air in from above and try to blow out, and it sank into the mud, and I left it there. And so it was replaced by another red hardware store bike, which kept me through high school. But when I went off to college, I was collegiate, and I went back to a series of Schwinn collegiates, which, if I remember, had flat bars and fenders, but I would put drop bars on them and take away the fenders. And they came in all the candy color paint schemes that would become popular on Porsches in the 70s, but this was the 60s. Bicycles have always been ahead of cars, and they would be stolen, and I would replace them. And I remember once in Chicago, oh God, if I were in Chicago now, I would begin to do the things I used to do, like ride along the outer drive at night at rush hour on my bicycle, but I survived. Once upon a time, I rode to school, and there was a huge blizzard. When I say huge blizzard, I think it was the blizzard of 66, 67, I guess 67, and it was famous. Maybe, and my bike was buried in the snow, and when the snow finally melted, I saw it in the morning, but by the afternoon it had been stolen. Well, after graduating from college, I got what was the bike I had for 17 years. It was my favorite bike in some ways. It was a Raleigh Carlton, handmade under an oak tree in Nottingham, Sherwood Forest probably, by a man named Carlton. And it was a beautifully made bike with beautifully bronze tubes and the like, but it was an ugly brown, kind of a shitty little brown bird brown, and no one stole it. But it was getting long in the tooth, and I was getting ready to move to Santa Fe. And I couldn't find parts for it, so I sold it to someone who was going to hang it on the wall as an object d'art. So many great machines end up in collections. And I bought a real mountain bike. It was a giant Sedona, and it was in colors officially Bata blue with kind of pink and yellow wires and the like. It looked like Santa Fe colors. It took me a while to adjust to it. A mountain bike, it seemed just hideous at the time compared to my very elegant Raleigh, but it seemed like what I needed for the mountains. And the funny part is, I never really rode it. I mean, the roads in Santa Fe, of course, are mountainous, but I never rode it up the mountain. But I could get parts for it, and I did a great restoration, replaced everything that could be replaced, and didn't lock it well enough while I went in the shop and came out and had only the frame left, which I was able to sell. Those giant Sedona frames are built like Sherman tanks or better, and I was able to sell it, and I got almost enough money to buy my first cross bike. It was another giant bike, a giant Innova. And it was so much lighter than that mountain bike, and slightly fatter tires than the old Raleigh had. So it was a great city bike, my introduction to cross bikes, of which my present bike, which, by the way, I call Carl Gustav Schade for reasons which should be obvious, Gus for short. Anyway, I could carry that thing up mountains that I couldn't ride, and it went everywhere. And then I moved to Charleston and on the low country. Gosh, it was wonderful because it didn't weigh anything, didn't have any wind resistance, and I discovered that it was Charleston green. But I've always had more money than brains, which isn't saying much because I have had very little money. And I decided I was going to get a fancy mountain bike again. I was going to be back in Santa Fe more. So I got another, excuse me, I'm getting ahead of myself. I got my first Marin, and I'd seen it at a bike shop in Marin County, and the model was a beautiful silver gray, and I ordered one, and while my order is being processed, they changed the color to red, and that wasn't as elegant, but it became kind of a Jeep Wagoneer of a bicycle, and I had racks and saddles, and oh, I have no idea how many miles I put on that bicycle. And you know, it was kind of like my old Schwinn. It weighed probably more than I did when it was all loaded up, but I could take it on the ferry and go to all the islands, because I took it from Santa Fe to out here on the coast. And it was stolen. And I was given by a friend probably the most expensive bike I've ever had. It was a carbon fiber, now what are those that are designed in, not Cannondale, designed in California bikes. And it was so many different colors, red and white, and I don't remember, black and shiny, and it just screamed expense. It was never stolen, probably because it'd be so easy to spot and was so rare, but at stop signs people would say, "Ooh, what a wonderful bike," and I found that embarrassing. So I gave it back and went into trying some other road bikes, or city bikes. Had a couple of treks, and they rusted. You know, they looked nice, but they were shy compared to my old Giant. So I got what I thought would be the last bike I would ever need, a Giant Escape. About 9 years ago now, 10 years ago now. And it was a very elegant looking bike, I thought. But when I moved to Bellingham last summer, it was stolen. And I was just going to replace it, but I found, alas, the replacements are not as well built and don't have as good components and cost twice as much. And one of the things I had liked about it, although it had an aluminum frame, it had a steel fork, but the new ones had aluminum forks as well, which kind of made my wrist uncomfortable. Although that one has a steel fork, and somehow it doesn't make my wrist uncomfortable. Anyway, that's how I ended up with Gus. Now, I mentioned earlier that Steve Jobs had said that personal computers were kind of like bicycles for the brain. And I'm not sure he really understood bicycles, since he famously tooled around Silicon Valley in a leased silver Mercedes that he never licensed because, you know, no one would know who he was. Somehow, however, people did take pictures of Steve's car. But that makes me think about what's happening to bicycles now, and I lament it, and it is what is happening in another area of tech, the personal computers. As I mentioned, the first screen I really began liking was not a television, but a tablet computer, because it allowed me to extend myself to be creative in ways that were just very convenient. It was made for my fingers and my mind in the way that a bicycle is made for my hands and my feet. But alas, we are being inundated, invaded, crushed, I'm afraid, by horrible things. I mean, there have been horrible things invading for a long time. I've made some car metaphors, car similes in this video because everybody knows about cars, but, you know, bicycles were around before cars. Roads are paved for bicycles. But then we had those cars, those infernal contraptions that were attractive to Mr. Toad. And at first, cars really needed us. We would have to crank them and advance their spark and steer them and light their headlights. But gradually, they have become less and less dependent upon us. They kill us by the thousands already. And they're beginning to be autonomous. Something, unfortunately, not too dissimilar is happening with bicycles, and we have e-bikes. I have seen almost no e-bikes that I wouldn't be embarrassed to be seen riding, and they tend more often than not to look like one of those things you would order from that cheap Chinese company that sells fakes everything. and the non-motorized trails are cluttered with people who are too fat to really ride a bicycle, but they're spinning along at 20 miles an hour because, well, they're saving the world. Who knows where the electricity is coming from or how it's made and what will be done with the batteries when they die. Something I think is seldom thought about by people who buy Teslas. And then we are having with a personal computer what is passed off as AI. Now, frankly, I think the guy who said ChatGPT is not AI, it's a glorified dictaphone, is right. I think there is such a thing as AI, or machine intelligence, and I think as some of the more insightful critics and proponents of AI have been saying for years, people working with AI will be a wonderful symbiotic relationship, much as a person on a bicycle has a wonderful symbiotic relationship with a machine. But, the ChatGPT is being advertised as something that will write meaningful blog posts for you. Well, F word. It's not a meaningful blog post if you didn't write it. I mean, it's not your meaning. Yes, you've seen this blog post and you approve it, but it's put together by Madison Avenue types. So I guess this is turning into a rant. But it's also, I want to rejoice because I just am delightful that 77, I can still ride my bicycle. Now I had planned, this is not the video I had planned to make today. This is often true. I had planned to make a video about going on an adventure for my birthday on my bicycle. And I have a puncture, and because my tools were stolen more than a year ago in Bellingham to replace my tire, and I had to order a new tube and new levers and the like, and they won't come till tomorrow. So my bicycle and I are both spending the birthday sitting in the shade reminiscing. But I'm just delighted that there is technology that has held out and been so useful as a bicycle. The Greeks had it right. A sane, what do they say, a sound mind and a sound body. And unfortunately, we are losing both, I'm afraid, when we give up our mind to chat bots and ChatGPT, and we give up our bodies to motors. But for those of us who remain weird after all these years, crazy after all these years, you can avoid ChatGPT. I haven't downloaded it. And you can still get a bicycle without a motor. Thanks be to God for glorious machines.